And after that, inshallah ta'ala, we can continue after Isha if there are more questions. Yes, inshallah ta'ala. Without any further delay, I give it to sister.
Jazakallah khair. Can you guys hear me okay? Okay, alhamdulillah. Bismillah walhamdulillah wassalatu wassalam ala rasulih al-kareem. We start as always in the name of Allah, and we send peace and blessings upon his noble messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. You're still having a hard time hearing me. Okay, I'm just going to hold it, and that way you can inshallah hear me better. My name is Lubaba Abdullah. I am an attorney. I've been practicing for almost 20 years, alhamdulillah. I've been practicing in St. Louis as well as here in Houston. I've been here for about the last 6 years. But I've been working mostly in the nonprofit sector the first 3 years I was here, and then just started my practice about a year and a half ago, alhamdulillah. I usually get these presentations with my dad, Sheikh Muhammad Nur Abdullah, but today he was unable to be here with us. And so Bismillah. So some of the things that we're going to cover today is what is an estate. We talk about Islamic estate planning. We talk about wills and trusts. You know, what does that all mean and what does it entail? So today we're going to cover what that is and what that means when someone says, I'm doing my estate or I'm getting my estate planned. We're going to talk about the importance of having an Islamic will. What are the Islamic inheritance laws? What are the basic requirements of an Islamic will? Or the importance of having a will under Texas law, the consequences, what are trusts and why do some people use them? And then we're going to close with just what is the importance of awqaf or endowments for the future of our Muslim institutions. So what is an estate? An estate is literally anything that you own. So it's a total of a person's properties, entitlements, and obligations. So that includes real properties such as your land and things attached to the land, such as trees or buildings or stationary mobile homes, but it also includes personal property, which is anything that's not real property. So movable goods like your, personal effects, your furniture, your cars, your jewelry, your artwork, that all becomes a part of your personal property, including copyrights, patents, trademarks, goodwill. And so your estate is literally everything you own at the time of death. There are 4 big parts. When you're talking about estate planning, there's 4 parts that attorneys cover with you. One is your assets, right? So what are the things that you own, right? The things that we talked about before, right? So how do they get there? Your family is the next big part, especially if you have minor children, or even if you have, older parents, right, that you are taking care of. How do you want to make sure, if God forbid something happens to me, that my parents are still taken care of the way that they are right now, that my children are taken care of? Who's going to physically take care of them and who's going to manage money for them? The next section talks about your comfort. If you are incapacitated, meaning you can't make decisions, who do you want to come in and make financial decisions for you? And who do you want to come in to make medical decisions for you? And what sort of framework have you left for them? What sort of guidance have you left for them? I get calls regularly. My dad gets calls regularly saying, this person's on life support or this person's in the hospital and they can't make decisions. The doctors are torn between wanting to do this and wanting to do this. What do we do? I'm like, well, if the person hasn't written out what their wishes are, you as their family, you as their children, their spouses, you're the ones that have to make the decision. And if you're divided, that becomes a problem because you're also fracturing the family. So as a person, I can write out what my wishes are. I don't want chemotherapy. If I have a terminal illness, my doctor's like, you're going to die. I don't want chemo. I don't want surgery. I don't want to be put on a ventilator. I want you to be let to die, right? But you can write out whatever those wishes are so that your family, your doctors, everyone has it. And it just gives clarity. Last thing is if you are a business owner, right? You want to make sure that your businesses pass on to the people you want them to go to, or that your family is able to either continue those businesses operating, or they're able to extract the assets, extract the finances, the money that is in there that you've worked so hard to build. You want to make sure that someone's able to take advantage of that your family is able to take advantage of that. So in the Quran, when Allah tells us about siyam, right, He says, "Kutiba alaykum as-siyam," right? Likewise, when he's talking about estate planning, he says, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمْ إِذَا حَضَرَ أَحَدَكُمُ الْمَوْتِ. It is prescribed that when death approaches any of you, if they leave something of value, a will should be made in favor of parents and immediate family with fairness. This is an obligation of those who are mindful of God. This is an obligation على حقا على المتقين, those that have taqwa, those that have that fear and that mindfulness of Allah. So what is estate planning, right? It was narrated by Abu Huraira that the Prophet ﷺ said, "O Abu Huraira, learn about the inheritance and teach it, for it is half of knowledge, but it will be forgotten. This is the first thing that will be taken away from my nation." And right now you see that there are not a lot of people who understand Islamic inheritance laws, as well as the laws of the state that we live in, and are able to put together a plan that complies with both, that protects you, that protects your children, that protects your family. An inheritance, subhanAllah, is one of the most detailed rulings in the Quran. It is divinely legislated, and it's a mechanism of ensuring wealth transfer to rightful heirs and preserving a just society. There are only a handful of verses, and I'll ask you the number of verses in like 2 slides. But there's only a handful of verses that talk about this. Right, another verse from Surah An-Nisa before the actual verses came down is that for men there is a share of in what their parents and close relatives leave, and for women there is a share in what their parents and close relatives leave, whether it is little or much. These are obligatory shares from Surah An-Nisa. Again, before Islam, women were seen as part of the inheritance, and or they were not given inheritance, right? We have Sa'd ibn Rabi' when he died in battle of Uhud, and his brother took his entire estate. So his wife went and complained to the Prophet ﷺ, and this verse was revealed, and the uncle was ordered to give 2/3 of the money to the daughters, 1/8 to his wife, and the rest went to the brother, and the brother could inherit that. So how many verses in the Quran talk about inheritance laws? And where are the verses? 6? Surah An-Nisa, great. Surah An-Nisa is where the verses are. How many verses that actually detail out what the inheritance is? There's 3. 11, 12, and 176. 11 and 12 came down first. 176 came down later because everyone had questions and were like, I don't understand. How does this make sense? The numbers don't make sense. And so we'll get into them. Right? There are many ahadith that talk about having a will, right? It's a duty of a Muslim who has anything to bequest to not let 2 nights pass without writing about it. Or, and this was also, the second hadith was also narrated by Abu Huraira, but he said it was 60 years. A man may do good deeds for 70 years, but if he acts unjustly, when he leaves his last testament, the wickedness of his deed will be sealed upon him and he will enter the fire. If, on the other hand, a man acts wickedly for 70 years, but is just in his last will and testament, the goodness of his deed will be sealed upon him and he will enter the garden. May Allah make us all of those. The problem with this is that we live in the United States, right, where Islamic law is not the norm. Right? If we were back home in Sudan or in Egypt or in Pakistan, right, there are courts that would allow the Islamic inheritance to go according to Sharia. But here there's not. And so many scholars have said that it becomes fard, it becomes obligatory on every Muslim to have a will. Because if you don't, the laws of the state of Texas is what's going to happen. So we have to have a will. You have to be truthful and fair in leaving your estate towards your parents and towards your family. And again, because of the intestacy laws that we have here, and intestacy just means dying without a will in in the US. If you die without a will, that means you have died intestate, and that means that the state legislature has come up with a plan for who inherits. It still goes to your family, but it does not go in the prescribed shares. Like parents don't inherit anything if you have children. Children might not inherit anything if you have a spouse. Right, and so the laws are not in compliance with what we want them to be. So ilm al-fara'id is the subject of injunctions concerning inheritance. Again, it was called half of knowledge because it affects all people, and it just involves knowing the rules for dividing the inheritance and distributing it so that each heir receives his or her proper share. So who inherits? The spouse will always inherit. Parents will always inherit. Children will always inherit. If you have parents, if you have children, nobody else inherits. If you have that inner circle, nobody else will inherit. If you're missing people from the inner circle, like if one of your parents has predeceased you, but you have a grandparent who is alive, that grandparent can step into the shoes of your mother or your father and inherit their share. Um, Children, likewise, if your children predecease you and you have grandchildren, there are opinions that say that the grandchildren can inherit the child's share. If you don't have anyone there, that's when it goes to brothers and sisters, nieces and nephews, and that's when it can go outside to, paternal aunts and uncles or their children, maternal aunts and uncles and their children. There are people who do not inherit under Islamic law. Someone who is not Muslim does not inherit. Someone who is an apostate, if they have left Islam, does not inherit. Someone who kills either directly or indirectly, someone who he inherits from, does not inherit. People who die simultaneously, like a family in a car accident, and there's no way to determine who dies first, they do not inherit. For some of these people, you can leave them something in your wasiyah, in your bequest, and that is up to 1/3 of the estate that you can leave to anyone for khair, for good, right? So if you have a non-Muslim spouse, you can leave them something from your wasiyah. Non-Muslim parents, leave them something in your wasiyah. If you want to leave, for the masjid or for an organization, leave it from your wasiyah. On top of what you're giving now, put aside a little bit. In one of my teachers calls it your 401a, right? Your 401 akhirah. Put a little bit aside. Yes. Stepchildren do not inherit. Stepchildren do not inherit. Again, you can leave them in the wasiyah. There have been cases where we have let stepchildren inherit, but just because of the types of assets. And when I've got cases like that, that's when I go to shuyukh and I get a fatwa for that family to make sure that we are not doing dhulm. And so if it's a case where there might be dhulm, that's where we sit down and we, go to the sheikh and we make sure that we get a fatwa to make sure that we are fulfilling the rights of everyone and not stripping someone of rights that they might have. Yes. Say that again. Both is fine with me.
So I have a question regarding that. Can we leave the wasiyah, some part of that should go to that?
100%. 100%. You should leave to. It's fun. Even in the Quran, there's a verse that says that if you have someone who comes and attends the division of the estate, you should give them. If someone comes, just attends, like someone who is a relative, a far relative, or someone who is in the house and taking care of the deceased, right? And they're there when you're dividing the inheritance, you should give them something, even if it's not written in the wasiyah, right? So again, just knowing that and knowing that there is rahmah in our religion, in the way things are divided, subhanAllah. Yes. Grandchildren, if their parents are alive, they don't inherit because again, the understanding is that they will receive from their parents. You can, if no grandchildren inherit, yes, you can leave them a little bit in your wasiyah, or while you're alive, you can set up a 529 plan for them. You can, again, do things while you're alive, make things easier for your families, and just do things while you're alive and do it fairly, right? Because we know the hadith of the man who wanted to give one of his sons a garden. So he told the Prophet ﷺ, come, I want you to witness me giving this to my child. And he's like, do you have other children? He's like, the man's like, yes. He's like, are you doing the same thing for them? And the man's like, no. He's like, then no, I will not be a witness to this. This is injustice, right? And so just making sure that we are being very intentional. Like, for example, you cannot give a wasiyah to warith, to someone who inherits. But my brother has special needs, right? So he can't work. He will never be able to work. He will never be able to take care of himself. So my parents are like, hey, we want to give him extra. Do you, as the rest of our children, mind? No, we don't mind. And so my parents gave him extra in their wasiyah, but that doesn't, so right now we don't mind, but let's say when my parents actually die, may Allah preserve them and keep them alive and healthy, right? And let's say one of us is like, you know what, I really need my full inheritance shares. I've got these expenses. So that person can take their full inheritance share because that's their right. And the rest of us can, we can disclaim a portion of our estate and leave my brother a little bit of extra, like my parents wanted. Right? So these are things that you can do. The problem is that we tend to shy away from having these conversations with our children, with our parents, with our family members, and we we need to have these conversations. We need to have clarity when we're doing things. So when you're looking at the types of heirs in the Quran, there are different types of heirs. There's heirs by fixed shares, right? Ashab al-furud, right? These are the people that receive the verses in the Quran, like mom, dad, wife, husband, maternal half siblings, daughters, sons, etc. There's heirs by the residuary, right? Al-asaba, and they receive the remainder after the fixed shares, like most male relatives. Like if I don't have like my son would receive, like it will tell you my son receives double what my daughter receives, right? So that is, he would receive as a fixed share, and then he would also receive as a residuary. Anything that's left over, he would receive it outside of the husband and the maternal half brother. And then you've got people who receive both, like the father might receive 1/6, but then he might also receive the rest, or the grandfather. So now we're into the verses. We said there's 3 verses, verse 11 and 12 in Surah An-Nisa, and then the last verse came, verse 176. So verse 11 starts by talking about children. It says, God commands you regarding your children. The share of the male will be twice that of the female. If you leave only 2 or more females, their share is 2/3 of the estate. But if there's only 1 female, her share will be 1/2. So if you've got children, your sons receive double what your daughters receive. You only have daughters, 1 receives half of your estate. 2 daughters or more receive 2/3. Why does a daughter receive half of her brother's share? Totally American child, where it was like, this is not fair. That's what I thought until I actually studied and learned. That's not fair. Why does he get double what I get? Why? What'd you say?
He is not obligated to spend for the family, whereas the male, the son, is obligated to financially to spend for the family.
Not just the family, the sister herself. I get half of my brother's inheritance. My money can go be sitting in my IRA or my 401k. My brother has a religious obligation to spend on me. If I'm not married, if my father is not there, if my grandfather is not there, my brother has a religious obligation to spend on me. I don't have to spend on him or on anyone else. I don't have to spend money on my kids. Every penny I spend on my children is sadaqah for me. I can give zakat to my husband, but he can't give zakat to me because that is an obligation on him, right? So a woman does not have the expense of jihad. She does not have the expense of maintaining her family, nor having to pay blood money. So under Islamic law, Sharia is not aimed at elevating one gender over the other, but it's to create a stable and a balanced society. Can you equalize the shares? Yes, by consent of all the heirs. And by consent, not today, but at consent at the time of death, where they know this is how much the money is. At that time, the brothers can say, yes, I agree. I'm going to disclaim a portion of my share, and we're going to all get equal. So verse 11 continues, and it talks about parents. Each parent is entitled to 1/6 if you leave offspring. But if you're childless and your parents are the only heirs, then your mother will receive 1/3. But if you leave siblings, then your mother will receive 1/6 after the fulfillment of bequests and debts. Bequests, this is the wasiyah that we talked about. So again, if the deceased left children, mom and dad get 1/6, right? They get equal shares, right? So there's only a handful. There's only 2 cases actually when the male gets double what the female gets, and that's in siblings, right? Siblings, whether it's half siblings or full siblings, or and that's when you get the 2-to-1 ratio. Otherwise, a lot of times the men and women will receive the same, like this ayah. If the deceased has no children, then mom gets 1/3, and the verse is silent, but what's implied is that father will receive the rest, because again, father has to spend on wife, on mother, and father also has to spend on siblings should the siblings need help and support. If the deceased has brothers and sisters, mom gets 1/6 and dad gets the rest. And again, siblings don't inherit. They would inherit whenever, the parents passed away. So the verse ends out by saying, be fair to your Be fair to your parents and children, as you do not fully know who is more beneficial to you. This is an obligation from God. God is surely all-knowing, all-wise. Subhanallah, right? Because a lot of times you have one child who's more dutiful, who doesn't make you go gray, who's like taking care of you and calling and doing all of this, but you don't know, right? Because one of the du'as that we say is, Ya muqallib al-qulub, thabbit qalbi ala dinik, right? Ya, O turner of hearts, make my heart firm on your deen. So you don't know which child Allah is going to guide, right? The child that made you go gray could be the child that is, doing Hajj on your behalf and doing Umrah on your behalf and paying Sadaqah on behalf and being that righteous child that's making dua for you. Right? So Allah tells us, you don't know, these are my rules. This is my law. This is what you do. Right? Because we know that after we die, everything stops. All of your good deeds stop except for three. Right? Sadaqah jariyah, continuous charity and ongoing charity, knowledge that others benefit from, and a righteous child who prays for you, who makes dua for you. And you don't know when that righteousness could come. And so Allah tells you, be fair. Again, if you want to gift while you're alive, gift, but again, gift fairly. That doesn't mean equally, right? Fairly does not mean equally. It means equity. Like if you have two children who are, doctors and lawyers, and you have one who's a teacher, yeah, it might make sense for you to give the teacher a little bit more while you're alive, right? To support her a little bit more or him a little bit more. But again, being fair and being clear and explaining to our children so that you're not creating discord. That is the biggest thing, is that you do not want to cause discord in the family when you're doing your wasiyah. So then we go to verse 12, and verse 12 talks about spouses. You will inherit half of what your wives leave if they are childless. But if they have children, then your share is 1/4 of the estate after the fulfillment of bequests and debts. And your wives will inherit 1/4 of what you leave if you are childless. But if you have children, then your wives will receive 1/8 of your estate after the fulfillment of bequests and debts. So the husband receives 1/2 of the wife's estate if she has no children, and 1/4 if she has children. And the wife receives 1/4 of the husband's estate if he has no children, and 1/8 is if he has children. If there's co-wives, they would share in that 1/8. The verse continues to talk about maternal half-siblings. And if a man or a woman leaves neither parents nor children, but only a brother or a sister from their mother's side, they will each inherit 1/6. But if they are more than one, they all will share 1/3 of the estate after the fulfillment of bequests and debts without harm to the heirs. This is a commandment from God, and God is all-knowing, most forbearing. This is the deceased is kalala. Someone who is kalala is someone who has no ascendants, so no parents, no grandparents, and no descendants, meaning no kids, no grandkids, but they have brothers and sisters. So this verse talks about maternal siblings, maternal half-siblings. So they receive 1/6 if there are only two siblings, but if they're more than that, they share in the 1/3. Again, if you look at this, if they share in the 1/3, and then you have the spouse who might get 1/4 or 1/8 or 1/2, you're still missing, right? That doesn't come up to a full one. So the Sahaba used to ask, and they were like, Ya Rasulullah, what is this? We don't understand. Make this clear for us. And so Allah reveals verse 176, the last ayah in Surah An-Nisa, and it starts by saying, Yastaftunaka. They ask you for a fatwa, O Prophet. قُلِ اللَّهُ يُفْتِيكُمْ. Say Allah will give you a fatwa. Allah will give you a ruling. Right? God gives you a ruling regarding those who die without children or parents, someone who is kalala. If a man dies childless and leaves behind a sister, she will inherit 1/2 of his estate, whereas her brother will inherit all of her estate if she dies childless. If this person leaves behind two sisters, they together will inherit 2/3 of the estate. But if the deceased leaves male and female siblings, a male's share will be equal to that of two females. God makes this clear to you so you do not go astray, and God has perfect knowledge of all things. And so this is, again, someone who is kalala, which means that they've got no ascendants, no descendants. So they leave only full siblings or paternal half-siblings. One sister receives 1/2, two or more sisters receive 2/3, both brothers and sisters, and receives the brother's share. Again, very similar to this is exactly what children receive. And a woman dies leaving only brothers, he inherits everything. And again, Allah closes out by saying, God makes this clear to you so you do not go astray, and God has perfect knowledge of all things. verses 13 and 14 are the verses after the two main verses, 11 and 12. And so they just close out by saying, again, these entitlements are the limits set by God. Whoever obeys God and his messenger will be admitted into gardens under which rivers flow to stay there forever. This is the ultimate triumph. But whoever disobeys God and his messenger and exceeds their limits will be cast into hell. May Allah protect us all to stay there forever, and they will suffer a humiliating punishment. So wasiya ordain, right? That's mentioned 4 times in these verses after any bequest he may have made or debt. It's mentioned 4 times in verses 11 and 12, and it stresses the importance of fulfilling the deceased wasiya, that 1/3, their bequests, and paying their debts. A lot of times the scholars say that wasiya is mentioned first, even though debts are paid first, to stress the importance. Because a lot of times people are like, oh, it's only a wasiya, we don't really have to follow it, right? So this is stressing that importance with Allah, that we fulfill any wasiya that people have. And so common uses of that 1/3 include huquq Allah, right? If you have any obligations to God that you have not fulfilled, you have not gone to Hajj and you were able to go, you had the money and you had the ability, the health to go, right? You can pay out of your 1/3 wasiya to pay for someone to go to Hajj for you. Ramadan, if you haven't made up your days from fasting, if you haven't paid your zakah, right? These are all ways that you can use huquq Allah out of that wasiya. And then providing for distant family members who do not inherit from you, you can leave for them in that wasiya. The reason why it was 1/3, there was a Sahabi, right, who left on his deathbed, freed 6 slaves, and that was his entire estate. And the wife came complaining to the Prophet ﷺ, saying that the man distributed his entire estate at the time of his death, on his deathbed. You know, he left nothing for us. What do we do? And the Prophet ﷺ went and actually brought the slaves back and freed 2 of them, right? So he freed 1/3 of them and left the other 2/3 as inheritance for the wife and the children. And again, if you're good at math and you've looked at all of these numbers, you'll notice that they don't always add up to 1. So what do you do in that case, right? And so when it's above 1, you reduce everyone's share proportionately, right? And a lot of people say that algebra was created to solve some of these really complex Islamic inheritance problems, right? Because you've got all of these inheritors, you've got like 1/3 here, 2/3 there, 1/8, you have 1/2, you have 1/4. And so to solve that, that's why some people say algebra was created. I don't know, but that's just a fun fact that we use. So again, that 1/3 can be given to charity, those who are not provided for as heirs under Islamic law. Again, non-Muslim wife or children, adopted children, special needs children, or anyone else or anything else for good, right? Inheritance is a means that Allah made for supporting one's nearest family, and one should not rob them of this opportunity or cause them to fall into poverty, right? That's not the goal. So what happens when you die under Islamic law and under Texas law? So under Islamic law, if you have anything borrowed, that gets returned to rightful owners. Any burial expenses come out of the estate. Any debts to people are paid. Debts to Allah can then be paid. Again, under Hanafi and Maliki madhab, they say that you can pay this if it is written in the wasiya and only up to 1/3. Then your wasiya up to that 1/3, and then you distribute the rest of the assets according to Sharia. Under state law, you have a process called probate. And probate is a legal process where the court determines if there is a will, if that will is valid, and then distributes a person's property if he or she dies without a will, right? So they appoint an executor, they find creditors, pay debts, pay those funeral expenses, pay any last medical expenses, pay any income and estate taxes, and then they distribute the assets according to Texas law or according to the will if there is a valid will. So things to consider: making a will, consider making a trust, right? When you're looking at a will, what are your duties under Islamic law? Where are all your assets? What are all of your liabilities, right? What are your debts? Will anyone contest your will? If so, you need to do certain things to make sure that does not happen, right? Consider making a trust, right? Protecting and distributing your property now, avoiding probate, making your healthcare directives, right? For drugs, for pain relief, for surgery, for a DNR, if that's applicable, right? Making a financial power of attorney, that if God forbid something happens to me, someone's able to go and pay my bills, pay my mortgage, pay Islamic school for my kids, pay whatever needs to be paid, that they're able to reach into my bank account and make those payments. Protecting my children, right? Making sure that someone is there to take care of my children, right? The guardian to take care of them, physically take care of them, and then someone to take care of the assets for them, to make sure that their assets are growing for them, making sure that zakat is paid for them, making sure that that they receive the money at a time where they are not going to be wasteful with it. My kids are 17 and 13, right? So under Texas law, they can't inherit. They inherit at 18. Well, you know what? We'll come back to this. Considering life insurance, understanding any tax consequences, if there are any tax consequences, funeral expenses, final arrangements, long-term care, if you should need it, right? That's again, just a consideration that you want to think about. So a lot of people call and they say, we don't have anything, do we really need a will? And they just put this on the back burner. The problem is that if you don't have a plan, the state of Texas has a plan for you. Right? If you don't have anything written out as far as what you want to happen to your things, the state of Texas has a plan for you. And that's what will happen. And it's designed to go through the probate process, which is designed for two reasons: to notify and pay any creditors, and to ensure that your heirs receive your assets. And it is a long process. It takes 6 months to 2 years, and you will pay anywhere from 4,000 to 5,000 in Texas. Around average is around 5,000. It can be a little bit less, but it can also be more. In other states, it's exorbitant. Like California, you're looking 20, 30, 40, $50,000 for probate. So alhamdulillah, Texas is it's not bad. But it's more expensive than doing a well thought out trust or a will plan, right? Because you've got to determine all the heirs. They have to be notified. It has to be published in the newspaper. And it's all a public record, right? So when you go through probate, you can look up any person who's died, and you can look and see exactly what their assets were, what their expenses were, who inherited, how much they inherited. It's all public record, right? And so the way to avoid that is by creating a trust, as well as using something called non-probate transfers, which we can talk about, which sometimes we do. So the consequences is that if you don't have anything, the court will appoint an executor. Usually it is a family member. If you have a family members are fighting, they might choose someone else. The pay for that executor comes out of your estate, and your heirs, more importantly, will get more or less than what is prescribed in Sharia. Said we'd come back to our kids. Again, minor kids cannot inherit until they're 18. So if you have minor children and something, God forbid, happens to you today, your children cannot inherit. A judge would literally hold the money, put it in the court, they've got a court registry. It would sit there. And then if the guardian needs money, they would basically go to the court, be like, hey, can I have, $12,000 to pay for Islamic school? Hey, can I have this to pay the mortgage? Right? And you want to avoid that as much as possible. And then at the age of 18, the judge would literally give your child a check for all of their share of the assets. Again, my kids are 17 and 13. I don't want my son to have access to, or my daughter to have access to unfettered access to the assets, right? In the Quran, Allah says, وَلَا تَأْتُوا السُّفَهَاءَ أَمْوَالَكُمْ. Do not give the immature person or the foolish person your money, right? Our children are foolish. They do not have the real world life skills to make decisions in a proper way. My son is 17. What does he want? He wants a car, right? And so if he wants a car, he would have to go talk to an adult for me and talk to his khala. I created a trust. I put his khala, my sister, as the trustee. So if he wants access to money, he has to go talk to an adult and have a conversation. Hey khala, I need a car. She's like, okay, Habibi, do you need a car or do you want a car, right? Is there a car for you to drive? Are there people available to take you where you need to go? Are you doing well in school? Do you have good grades? Are you working? Right? Okay, fine. Yeah, Habibi, yeah, you need a car. He comes back and is like, I want a $50,000 car. His khala laughs at him and is like, your mom never bought a $50,000 car. There's no way you're buying a $50,000 car. Here's $7,000. Here's $5,000. Here's $10,000. Go buy yourself a nice used Camry, a nice used Corolla. In 10 years, you want your $50,000 car? Use your money and go get it. right? But that's not why your mom worked hard, right? She wants to pay for college. She wants to pay for, graduate school. She wants to pay for a down payment on a house. She wants to help you build wealth and not for you to waste it on a car at the age of 17 or 18. So again, so that's the beauty of creating something like a trust, doing something so that so my kids would receive income at the age of 21. If they need money before 21, they actually have to go talk to whoever I chose as a trustee. And I have a list, right? So my sister is first, so their khala. If she's not available, then my dad is next. If he's not available, then my other sister, then my friend, right? So they would just go down the order so you don't have to update documents regularly and have, again, that conversation of this is what I need. What do you think? Can I do this? Does this make sense? Is this wise? Is this not? And so that's what I set up for my children, that I recommend that people set up for their children. Yes. They can be trustees. Again, it depends on your children, how responsible they are, and then how they are with their siblings. Right. And so again, it goes back to your family and your family circumstances. There's cases where, we've put children as trustees as young as 22, but they're super responsible, super on top of things and help, and they're on top of things. For a lot of children, I wouldn't put them as trustees until they're probably in their 30s, and I would put a co-trustee with them, right? So if they're below the age of 30, their uncle is going to be a co-trustee with them to help them make decisions. Once they turn 30, they can be the trustee and make decisions, right? So you can write that all in. You're welcome. So one of the problems is that a lot of times we have assets and our family don't know where our assets are. I just met with a couple this morning. She's a physician. He's in finance. And she's like, I've been telling him, I don't know anything about our finances. If la samahullah, God forbid, something happens to him, I don't know where to start. And this is an educated, she's a physician. So she's not very smart, mashallah. But if our families don't know where our assets are, what you're doing is you're giving money to the Texas Department of Unclaimed Property. When I wrote this a few years ago, there was over $6 billion in the Texas unclaimed property, because the bank is not going to come and be like, oh, this person died, let me give you the money. They're going to hold it. They're going to put a freeze on the account. After a few years, they're going to send it to the Texas Department of Unclaimed Property and be like, we're done. We've done our part. Right? And so our families need to know where our money, where our assets are. Like my family might know I bank at Bank of America, but they don't know I've got accounts at Capital One or Wells Fargo or whatever, or my Roth IRA or my 401k or my Fidelity account. If I haven't told them, so one thing I give my clients is I give them a binder that has a copy of all of their estate planning documents, like their will, their trust, their financial power of attorney, their medical power of attorney, but it also has a place for them to put deeds to their houses, any partnership agreements if they've got businesses, copies of their tax return, copies of their bank accounts, copies of their brokerage accounts. And I tell them every year, update this. Whenever you do your taxes, print out a copy of your taxes, put it in here, and print out a copy of all of your bank accounts. Because I'm sitting with an auntie in our community whose husband passed away maybe a year and a half ago, and they were pack rats, so they have paper everywhere. So she'll still come to me and be like, I found a statement. What do I do with this from 2004? I'm like, well, let's call and find out if the money is there. And we call, and subhanAllah, we found money from, subhanAllah, you don't even know, right? But you don't want your family to be doing that and finding random things and spending hours on the phone. And if they're not able to do it themselves, paying an attorney to sit down and make these calls with them, right? You want to make things easy. So making sure that we are making things accessible for our families. So God forbid. And again, and I was telling the couple that I met with this morning, I'm like, if you as a spouse don't know, let alone anyone else, right? What about your siblings? What about whoever else is going to come, or your kids, right? Whoever's going to come and fix this or deal with this, you have to make things as easy as possible upon your death. Because as it is, they're going to be grieving you, right? You don't want them to be going through all of this stuff and being like, why, mama, why? That's what I keep telling myself as I'm cleaning my house and minimalizing everything. I don't want my kids to be going through all of these things and cursing me, being like, why did you not throw away any paper? Why did you not organize things? But that's just me as I'm going through this own process. So last thing we're going to touch on before, what time do you guys pray Isha, by the way? 9:30. Okay, so alhamdulillah, we still have 35 minutes. We'll get through the slides easily. We're over halfway done. So we're in Texas. Texas has community property. Not all states have community property. So what does that mean? So you have separate property. Separate property is anything I owned or claimed by a spouse before marriage, or they received it by gift, or inheritance or several personal property claims, right? Or certain personal injury claims. So if I receive something as a gift to me, if my parents gift me $10,000, that is my separate money. But if I take that $10,000 and I put it in my joint account that I have with my husband, that we both spend from, that can stop being separate property and become joint property, right? If I receive my inheritance and I put it in a joint account, I will have a hard time saying, oh, that's still my separate property. So we need to teach our children that when they receive inheritance or for giving a gift to our child, that you need to have your own separate bank account where you put this money in. You can definitely pull out of it and spend on your family, take them all on vacation, no issues. And you want the rest of it to remain the separate property. So we have to, again, just be mindful about teaching our children about financial literacy and teaching ourselves, to be honest, because I'm, again, learning this all in my 40s and trying to set things up for my children now. So that's separate property. Community property in Texas and in the 6 or 7 states that are community property states that include California and Arizona and Texas is anything that's earned during marriage. So if I work while I'm married, that becomes community property and is liable to be split 50-50. Whether it is, again, this is, again, if you do not have a prenup or a postnup or a marital agreement that says differently, everything is presumed to be 50-50 unless you can prove it is separate. And therefore it's liable to be divided in half upon inheritance or upon divorce. And that's why, again, it's just very important to have clarity in these conversations while we're alive. Yes. It's true for both men and women under Texas law, yes. As a woman, if I work, it's presumed to be marital and 50-50 community property. Not in Sharia. In Sharia, my money is my money. His money is his money, but he has to spend on me and our kids. Yes, and there's like nuance there, and there's more nuance when it comes to, again, if the wife only receives 1/8, what does that look like? Does she receive 1/8 of everything of his? Does she receive half of everything and then 1/8 of his share? Right? And there are scholars that will give you both fatwa, honestly speaking. And when I talk to clients, one of the things I ask them, again, we have a lot of uncomfortable conversations. We have to talk about, kids, or who you're going to choose a trustee, who are you going to choose as guardian, who's going to raise your kids if you can't raise them. And everyone's like, my family. And the wife is like, no, my family, right? So we have to have really difficult conversations, including about money, right? If the wife hasn't worked ever during the marriage, do you consider everything in the marriage yours, whoever worked, or is it both of yours, right? Because that will affect how we divide the inheritance. So again, we just have to have clarity and have these conversations. As uncomfortable as they are, we have to have them because it makes things so much easier on our families upon our death. And that's the goal. The goal is to make things easy for our families. So in Texas, if you don't have a will, this is what happens. If you don't have children, if you're a single person and you have children, then it goes just to your children. If one of your children has predeceased, it goes to their children. Otherwise, that's it. Very nice and simple. If you don't have children, it goes to your parents equally. If you only have one parent alive and no sibling, then your estate goes to your one parent. Again, if you have like siblings, then it gets a little bit more complicated, but that's like in general. So again, siblings and parents, siblings inherit, spouses inherit. If you are married with and without children, if your surviving spouse will inherit all of your community property if the children are also the children of the surviving spouse. So if the children are only the children of this marriage, then the spouse receives everything that you earned during marriage. They receive 1/3 of your separate property and a life estate. So a life estate just means the right to use the property until his or her death, and 1/3 of your separate real property. The rest is inherited outright by the children of the deceased spouse. Otherwise, all of your 1/2 interest of your community estate will pass to your children, and your spouse only keeps half their 1/2. If you're married but you have no children or other descendants, then your surviving spouse will be entitled to all of the separate personal property. If you have surviving parents and siblings, Again, it just gets more and more convoluted and a little bit more detailed. But in general, spouses inherit, children inherit, parents inherit, but the default is going to be spouses. And then if not spouses, then spouses and children. And then potentially parents can step in. So we've got a simple example. We've got a deceased person. They have a spouse and they have 2 kids. What happens? Under Texas law, since the kids are all the kids from the same marriage and there's a surviving spouse, they receive 100% of the community property. Everything that was earned by that spouse during marriage goes to that spouse. The spouse also receives 1/3 of any separate property and a life estate, so the ability to use any separate property, and the rest goes to your children. What about under Islamic law? Who gets what? See how well you guys are paying attention. What does the spouse get? 1/8 or 1/4. The husband gets 1/4 of the wife's estate. I didn't genderify it, so like that we could do both, right? So husband gets 1/4 of the wife's estate since there are children. Wife gets 1/8 since there are kids. If there are no kids, they would get double that. Husband would get 1/2, wife would get 1/4. What do the children get? Exactly. So what do they get? Okay, if they're a boy and a girl, the girl would get 1/3, boy would get 2/3. If they're 2 girls, what do they get? 1/3 each. They get 2/3. 2 or more girls share 2/3. And if they are 2 sons, they get 50-50, whatever's left. Yeah, so 2 boys receive equal shares. They receive 50-50. 2 girls receive 1/3 each. If they're girl and boy, she receives 1/3, he receives 2/3. Let's complicate it a little bit. You got parents too. What happens? Under Texas law, it's exactly the same. Nothing changes. Parents don't inherit anything. The spouse receives everything that is community property, and they receive 1/3 of any separate property, and the children get the rest. What about under Islamic law? Husband gets the same, wife gets the same. This is where we change. What do mom and dad get? Do they get anything? If there's no sons, okay, what else? Any other ideas? Do parents get anything? Okay, if they're both daughters, yes, parents might get that rad, that father might get the ending. Come on, you guys. Mom and dad each receive 1/6. They get equal shares. Right? Verse 11 says this starts with the children, then it goes to the parents. Parents receive equally, they each get 1/6. And then the kids receive what we just talked about. 2 boys receive equal shares, 2 girls receive 1/3 each. A girl and a boy, she receives 1/3, he receives 2/3. So to create a valid will, any person who is of sound mind, who is at least 18 years of old, has to be in writing. It has to be signed by the testator. The testator is the person who's writing the will, or at their direction. So if I can't write, if I'm like paralyzed, I can tell, hey, can you sign this for me and write your name and then signed by you, and attest it to you. You have to have 2 competent witnesses who are at least 14 years of age who sign the will in the presence of the testator. So they need to all be in the same room together signing it. Once you have a will that is signed, it doesn't need to be notarized, but you can notarize it. I do notarize my wills. You cannot strike out portions. So let's say you wrote, 10% to Brand Lane, and then something happened and you're like, no, I'm not giving them any. I'm going to go write it out. That's not valid, right? You've got to redo the will if you want it to happen. One thing in Texas is that a holographic will is valid, which means that if you have a 100% handwritten will, that is valid. So if you do not have a will, I urge you to go home, spend 10 minutes. My name is Lubaba Abdullah. I am unmarried. I have 2 children, Yusuf Ahmed and Ayat Ahmed. They are 17 and 13. This is my last will and testament. I want my estate to go according to Islamic law. These are my father gets 1/6, my mother gets 1/6. My daughter receives half of whatever her brother receives, period, right? I want to give sadaqah jariyah and this, and more importantly, I want to leave this person as the guardian of my children. I want my sister to take care of my kids. If my sister's not available, I want my father to take care of my kids. If he's not available, I want my friend to take care of my kids. Sign it and date it, and that is a valid will in the state of Texas. So until you do something formal, that will at the very least get your assets divided according to Sharia, and make sure that you have put in your guardian for your minor children. Yes. It has to be writing. It's a holographic will. It has to be 100. Like you can't type it out, print it, and then sign. That's not valid. And when you sign, it has to be two uninterested witnesses. So you can't have your kids sign for you as witnesses, or your parents or your siblings. Someone who inherits from you cannot be the one who's witnessing it. It needs to be two, I've come to the masjid and I've actually had people sign wills in the masjid, not in Texas, I don't think. But in Missouri, I used to do it all the time. I lived across the street from the masjid. So I'd be like, let's go. We're going to meet at dhuhr time. We pray dhuhr. And I'm like, let's go. I got two witnesses, and we just sit down and we sign quickly. Right. And so you got to have two people who are not inheritors to sign the witnesses. The power of a will, if you create a valid will, you will have the power to give according to Islamic law and according to Texas law. Again, you don't fall to the rules of intestacy, which is dying without a will, which again, do not follow Sharia like we just saw. And someone will have to go to court to get guardianship over your minor children or any adult disabled children. And if you haven't written it out, you have no say, right? Let's say one of your siblings, may Allah protect us all and protect all of our families, who's not practicing. You don't want that person to raise your children. You have no say. The court might choose them because they might look better on paper than anyone else. You have no say unless you have written it out and put it there. So this question asked, if you have only girls, how is it distributed if husband and wife pass away? Daughters receive 2/3. If there's two or more girls, they share in 2/3. And then parents would receive 1/6, 1/6, and that's it. If the parents die, then the daughters would receive 2/3, and then you look for the closest male relative. If there is not a close male relative, like I had a case where it's two daughters and father passed away. There were uncles, but the uncles were in Egypt and had never, like the daughters didn't know them. They'd never spent on them. They'd never seen them. And the scholars were like, no, they wouldn't inherit because they're not wali. They're not they have not fulfilled their job. Like one of the duties of receiving that 2/3 is that you are a wali. You are someone who is maintaining the women. So if you have not maintained, you don't receive inheritance. Again, according to some scholars will be like, no, they still receive. So it just depends. And again, these are questions that the scholars are now talking about and having discussions about and doing ijtihad on, okay, what do we do in these situations? How does this make sense? If, my son is not going to spend on his sister, and I know that because he hasn't for the last 10 years or 20 years, does he still receive double? What are some systems that we can set into play to make sure that we're taking care of our daughters, right? So these are questions that scholars and attorneys are talking about and trying to see what are solutions to these issues. Because again, back home, we have courts. We have courts that if like my brother is not taking care of me, I can go to a qadi in Sudan and be like, hey, he's not supporting me. And the qadi can hold him accountable. We don't have those here in America. So what do we do? And again, these are discussions that scholars are starting to have, alhamdulillah, finally. And, we don't have like clear-cut answers yet. And I don't think we ever will, but we'll have options, inshallah, bi'idhnillah. Yes. Yeah.
And they want to provide the bill. In their life, they will give the dates, right, for that company. So,
If you have 4 daughters, they each get 1/6. 1/6, 1/6, because they share 2/3. In your life, you can gift as you want to. I have families that will say, I'm gifting my house. They've got daughters and sons. They're like, we're gifting our marital residence to our daughters. That's okay. That's okay to gift while you're alive, to, gift extra to your daughters. Gift to your sons, but gift extra to your daughters, yes. You can do that with the understanding that, okay, I want to make sure that if God forbid something happens to me, my daughter always has a house to live in. She always has like either income or something like that. You can do that. Again, it's just the clarity. It's having these conversations with our children so that they understand. And we can also ask, like, if you only have daughters and there's no other relatives around, you can ask brothers and sisters to disclaim, like, hi, my siblings, you guys don't need the money, right? I'm asking you, like, this is your share. This is what has been obligated and this is what you get. And I would really like if you don't take it because I have 2 kids. I don't have any, like, there's no support network. There's nobody else there for them. Can you please, like, it's called tanazul or disclaim your share and let my kids have a bigger share. So again, you just have to have these conversations with our families. I know that it's difficult because we don't like talking about death and we don't like talking about money. And so those just lead to a lot of bad feelings if we're not having the discussions. To answer your question? Again, you can, it's not. Under Islamic law, parents get their share. So you have to leave the 1616 to his parents, 1616 to her parents, and then the daughters receive whatever's left. Again, you can ask them to not take their share, but it's their right. And again, Allah tells us, right? Allah knows. Allah knows, and this is what He's legislated. And I will write in my wills, right? Our sons we intend to follow Islamic law, our sons get more, or our fathers get more, or our grandfathers get more. But with that comes a religious obligation to care for the women in their lives, right? To care for mother, to care for sisters, to care for, aunts, uncles, extended relatives. That is an obligation from God. And so I remind them of that in the will, just again, to reiterate the lessons that should have been coming home. Yes. Yes, she can. While she's alive, she can give to whoever she wants to, no issues. And we have like a hadith where, they went to go collect zakah or sadaqah from the women's section, and the women were just taking off jewelry and donating it. They weren't going and asking husbands, oh, hey, can I donate my jewelry? They were just donating. So yes, you're able to. Yes, definitely. And so the next question goes into what is a trust? So a trust is a legal entity that holds assets for many purposes. It's designed to ensure that assets are managed or distributed to the beneficiaries in accordance to the terms of the trust instrument. And so there's 3 parties involved. The grantor, or the person who creates the trust, was also known as the trustor, the grantor, the settlor. The trustee, the person or the entity who controls and manages the assets in the trust, and it can be multiple people as co-trustees, and it can be the grantor, and then the beneficiary, and these are the people or the entities who benefit from the assets in the trust. And they're commonly used in estate planning strategies. I use them a lot, especially when there are minor children. I 100% recommend a trust. I do not recommend just a will. And one of the main goals is to avoid the hassle and the expense of the probate process, to reduce the risk of the assets being encumbered by taxes, and then protecting the heirs from themselves, where there is a concern for, financial irresponsibility, young age, immaturity, addictions, gambling, disability, or more. And so it can be the same person can be the one who creates the trust, the grantor. They can be the trustee, and they can be a beneficiary. Like, I created my trust, so I'm the grantor. I am the trustee, so I manage the assets right now, and I'm a beneficiary of the trust. I can use the trust money to spend on myself. Right? So I can do all 3 if it is something called like a revocable living trust. There's other types of trusts that we'll go into, but this is sort of like a picture of like what that looks like, right? So you have all of your assets, you put them in this trust. The trust it's literally like a box where you write out, these are all of my assets. I want them divided this way to these people at these times. And then I take my house and I put it in there. I take my bank accounts and I make a beneficiary designation, putting it into the trust. I take my life insurance, my IRA, my cars, all of my assets, and I pour them into the trust. And then I manage them while I'm alive. If, God forbid, something happens to me, I'm either incapacitated or I pass away, my next trustee comes and manages it for me and my kids. If I pass away, they manage it just for my children. So again, there's a lot of different types of trust. There's revocable trust, a living trust, an irrevocable trust. There's testamentary trusts, right? And so there's a lot of different trusts. So some of the benefits of a trust is that wills go through probate, like we talked about. It's that public court hearing which takes time, which takes money. You have to hire a lawyer for probate in Texas. And the trust does not. A trust, you can ensure that parents and grandparents are supported, right? If we have our assets, we put, 2 rental houses in the trust, but our parents are living in it, we can give our parents a life estate. My parents stay living in this house, paying nothing until they die. After they die, then my kids can receive that as their inheritance, right? So I can do those types of things with a trust, can ensure that wives and daughters, likewise, again, putting my house in there, my daughters can live in here rent-free for the rest of their lives, right? You can also use it to avoid estate taxes. Again, that's usually not an issue in Texas because we don't have estate taxes here, and the federal estate tax in the nice, big, beautiful bill that they passed is now 13.99 million each. So if your assets are above that, you don't have to worry about estate taxes. Which again, I haven't updated. Well, again, yes, I did. Federal tax on estate where a decedent's assets are greater than 13.99 million, and the tax usually doesn't apply if you're leaving it to a spouse or a federally recognized charity, and there's no gift tax. So if you have assets and you're reaching that number, one way to use it is to gift to your children, to gift to your grandchildren, and you can gift up to $18,000 without having a gift tax. An inheritance tax max is at 40%. And again, this is for U.S. citizens. Some of these are for U.S. citizens only. So what happens if you're incapacitated? Incapacitated means you are unable to handle your personal and financial affairs. Again, it depends on the circumstances, depends on how long you're incapacitated, depends on your family is close by, right? Who's going to make sure that your rent or your mortgage is paid, that, that Islamic school is paid, that, that things are done for you, that people are making the medical decisions that you want them to make. And so you want to make sure that if you have a physical or mental incapacitation that is either temporary or permanent due to the different factors like your temporary illness, a serious car accident, a permanent health condition, that you are creating documents to make sure that people can step in and take care of things for your family so they're not having to go to court to get access to things. So some of the things that you can do are have a designation of a guardian for a minor child, which tells the court who you want to take care of your child and who should control any money or property for the care of that child. The second thing is designing a guardian in case you are incapacitated. So if I'm incapacitated, I want my dad to take care of me. I want my mom to take care of me. If they're not available, I want my sister. If she's not available, then I want my son, right? So I have a list of who takes care of me if I'm unable to take care for myself. A durable power of attorney lets you choose who can pay your bills, who can access your bank account, talk to your insurance company, your employer, sell or buy property, etc. Medical power of attorney or a healthcare proxy lets you choose the person who you want to make medical decisions for you. If a doctor says you cannot do so, you can also draft a document with what your wishes are if you're incapacitated. One thing I put in my medical power of attorney is that before any end of life decisions are made, a Muslim imam must be consulted. Right? I want them to include an imam, make sure that they are doing the right decision, and making sure that there's no discord within siblings, within families. And then the last document is a living will, or a healthcare directive, and that tells your loved ones and your doctors how you want to proceed. Right? Do you want organ donation? Do you not want organ donation? Do you want to be put on a ventilator? Do you not? Do you want a feeding tube? Do you not want a feeding tube? Do you want IV hydration? Right? Do you want medical pain relief if that might cause your death to hasten? Right? So you can write out your wishes or your lack thereof and just tell your family, you make the decision or you make the call, or whoever I've appointed as a medical power of attorney can make that decision. But again, you want to give them clarity in these decisions to make things easier for them. Last couple of slides, we're going to talk about non-probate transfers. Again, a lot of times for my older couples, my parents, like in their 60s, 70s, when your kids are in your 30s and 40s, you don't necessarily need a trust. You can get away with just doing something called non-probate transfers, which are joint property, joint ownership, right? Where you can designate on your bank account, on your houses, on your cars, that upon my death, I want it to go to this person, right? So if you own things jointly, then it automatically goes to that second person. If you own a bank account just by yourself, you can put something called a payable on death or a transfer on death that leaves that bank account to a certain person upon your death or certain people upon your death or your trust. And that will allow it to, again, be divided according to Sharia. So you can set this up for all of your accounts in Texas, all of your assets. I have not had any person come with an asset in Texas that we haven't done this with, where you can leave non-probate transfers. But again, this goes back to talking about your family, talking about, are they responsible? Are they going to make sure that your wasiyas are paid, right? Because when you put it with the non-probate transfer, it goes to them automatically and they own 100%. So if they don't have that iman, if they're not able to be like, okay, mom and dad left me this $100,000 in this account, that $100,000, they wanted $33,000 to go as sadaqah jariyah. I need to pay that out first. And then the rest of it needs to be divided among my siblings. My brothers get this share, I get this share, right? If they're not going to be responsible to do that, then you do a trust, right? But if your children are going to be responsible enough to do that, then you can utilize non-probate transfers to make sure all of your assets go to your children. And again, the beauty of this is that you also avoid probate. You avoid going to court when you have these systems set up. The last thing we're going to talk about is just waqfs or endowments. And again, this is a means of support of our fellow Muslims and Muslim organizations. If we have these waqfs set up, you're not going to have fundraisers. You're not going to have fundraisers in Ramadan. You're not going to do all of that, because you're going to have money that is going to be coming in to supporting our Islamic institutions. This is again a sadaqah jariyah. This is abwab al-bir. These are the doors to goodness that we've talked about. I remember last year when there was a lot of movement on college campuses to have universities divest from Israel, right? One of the reasons why is that when you look at US universities, they have $839,000 billion. Again, US universities have $839,000 billion. And so when we're looking at divestment, right, it's a very powerful tool because they have built these institutions, these endowments to support their universities. We need to have the same thing for our masajid, for our Islamic schools, so that we constantly have income coming in and maintenance being paid. I remember my dad started our Islamic school in St. Louis, and they had a brother on there, mashallah, may Allah reward him, Brother Zia, who was, again, very financially ahead of his time. This was like in the 80s and the 90s, and he set up an endowment for our school, an endowment for our masjid. And then, years later, my dad, left the masjid, went out of the country, and I joined the school board. And then there was a building for sale across the street, and I was like, and it was a former kindercare, it was a former daycare center. I was like, that would be so awesome to put our early childhood center there. And so I got people together and we went and we looked at it, and it was like a reasonable price. And they're like, well, we don't have money. I'm like, well, we have an endowment. They're like, no, we don't. They're like, we have a masjid endowment. I'm like, no, we have a school one too. Nobody knew about it. And I was like, no, there is one. So we went and I found the endowment. I found the brother. The money was still there. It was still growing. It was over $500,000, right? And so we were able to use that to put a down payment on this building. And that building now pays for the rest of our Islamic school, right? Because and so again, that is the beauty of having endowments. And if you look at when we had and the types of endowments we have in Islamic history, besides our masajid and our schools, but our hospitals and mental health facilities, farm animals. When the farm animal was old and couldn't work the farm, people had fields for them to go, pastures for them to go and just graze at for their old life. Students, people who want to do research. For a servant, if they accidentally broke a dish or broke something of their owner, they could go here and get money instead of it coming out of their paycheck. Right? Older people that don't have families to take care of them, right? These are the ways this is our history, right? As Muslims, like if you look at the oldest degree granting university in the world, it was built by a Muslim woman from her inheritance. Al-Qarawiyyin is the oldest degree granting university in the world, built by a Muslim woman from her inheritance, from her father. Right? So that is our history, that is our legacy. So we need to reclaim it and making sure that when we are creating our wills, creating our trust, on top of what we're giving regularly, we need to give something for our akhirah. Put something in the endowments of ISGH, put something in the endowment of Everest Academy, of the Ilm Academy, of the different Islamic schools, right? Or whatever it is that helps. And I tell families, I'm like, What are the organizations that have supported you, that supported your children, right? That's where you should give them some money in your will, in your trust. So again, some takeaways as we wrap up, because alhamdulillah, I've got like 3 more minutes and I'm basically done. I've got my last 2 slides, alhamdulillah. So children are our most important asset. We want to make sure that we're taking care of them and that we have set them up for success. Endowments are an essential part of our religion, an important way to safeguard the future for our children. Wills do not avoid probate. So having a will by itself will not avoid probate unless you include those non-probate transfers. And again, we've talked about how probate is that long, public, costly process. So a living trust or those non-probate transfers can bypass that court process and allow for privacy and immediate access and control. Reviewing all of your assets has to be a part of your estate planning conversation, right? We want to make sure that that Department of Unclaimed Assets does not get any of our money. And estate planning requires intentional action, right? Planning keeps you in control, keeps you informed, and gives you a huge cost savings because, like we said, that state of Texas's plan is not ideal for most of our families. It doesn't protect your dollars and it does not protect your children. Again, my name is Lubaba Abdullah. My law office is Abdullah Law Office. I've been practicing for almost 15 years, over 15 years, 17 years, alhamdulillah. And the first step is, again, setting up a free 30-minute consult that is online virtual that you can do on the website, which is www.abdullahlawoffice.com. Jazakumullahu khair. There's a question?
I have a question. Inheritance happened by both of us. One person died. Own 1%. What happened? One person died. Give them the report. They say, mom or dad, now he gave us our sell the house. Half is his or hers. Half is theirs.
I do for houses is I will give the house to each other.
Can we keep it after the Isha? Inshallah. Thank you, Sister Lubaba. May Allah bless you. As she mentioned about the endowments, please, when you make a will or trust, consider our Islamic organizations for that also, part of that.
डाल दिए तुम दूसरे
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة